Mr. President, for the record, the Democratic leader, Senator Reid, is attending a funeral this morning, and I'm standing in his stead. First, to address the comments from the majority leader, Senator McConnell, I have to disagree with his opening that Democrats are not interested in funding the government, that Democrats are not interested in funding the Department of Defense. I may remind my friend from Kentucky, the senator who is the Republican leader, it was the Republican side that initiated the government shutdown 2 years ago. 16 days, the government was shut down in a vain attempt to protest the Affordable Care Act. And now that threat is before us again. It's unfortunate that we are facing this, but I don't believe it is fair to blame our side of the aisle for delay. You see, Mr. President, as early as June, we started saying we're facing an October 1st deadline. We need to have a budget compromise, a budget negotiation. Why? Because there's a fundamental disagreement about funding our government in this fiscal year that began October 1st. The Republicans have argued to use wartime funds, $38 billion worth, to supplement the Department of Defense. The leaders at the Department of Defense say this is the wrong approach. They cannot build a strong national defense with an injection of wartime funds which may or may not exist at the end of the process, may or may not exist next year. And I might add coincidentally that the Republicans failed to put additional funds in for non-defense spending. Some of it's related to national security, the Department of Homeland Security, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, so many agencies that keep us safe here in the United States. And the failure of the Republicans to provide funds for critical agencies that provide health and education services, that's the reason why we've reached an impasse in the budget negotiation. It's why 3 months ago, we on the Democratic side said to the Republicans, you're in charge, you're in the majority, but if we're going to have a process that ultimately succeeds, you need to engage on a bipartisan basis this negotiation. They refused. They refused, and they came up with a short-term spending bill we call a continuing resolution, or CR, that takes us to the first or second week of December. Beyond that, there's no certainty about what's going to happen. The senator from Kentucky talks about the appropriation process where so many senators voted for a bill and now are against it. I've been on appropriations committees in the House and Senate for a long time. At least in the Senate, we have an upside-down approach where you vote on the overall bill first, then vote on amendments. In each of the cases the senator from Kentucky refers to, many of us may have voted for the overall bill, hoping that amendments would solve the budget problems I've described. When those amendments failed to solve those budget problems, we said this ultimate bill is not going to work, and we know it. That's the reality of the process in the Appropriations Committee. So in June, we invited the Republicans to meet with the president and Democratic leaders to work out a budget compromise. There's an indication that some conversation is underway, but not enough. Why have we reached this impasse? Frankly, it's because the Republican leadership, certainly in the House, is in disarray. Today, there's going to be an election in the House of Representatives for a new speaker. A group of conservative, ultra-conservative Republican House members were successful in ousting John Boehner from the speakership. And now they're going to try to replace him, but with conditions. One of those conditions is, and they printed in the paper this morning, that the new House Speaker has to pledge to the Freedom Caucus, the Tea Party Republicans, has to pledge to them that he will never agree to any compromise that is bipartisan bill coming out of the Senate. Now, how's that for a standard when you're trying to govern in this country, when you have a president of one party and the Congress in control of the other party? The Freedom Caucus said, don't negotiate, don't compromise. That is a recipe for a shutdown, a sequestration, and a continuing resolution. And let me tell you what it does. If we get into a continuing resolution for next year, this year we're in, I should say, it's going to mean dramatic cuts in many agencies. Yesterday, the National Institutes of Health were called by Senator Blunt, who chairs the Appropriations Committee for that agency. We sat before Dr. Collins and his leading researchers for the United States of America, and we asked them, what happens If our budget process breaks down, if we go into sequestration, which is an across-the-board cut, or we go into a continuing resolution, which is just a continuation of this year's budget, what happens at the premier medical research facility in the world, the National Institutes of Health? Dr. Collins told us in very honest and somber tones, it would mean that we would suspend research in areas like precision medicine, destined to, I think, save lives across the world. We would suspend research, brain research, in areas like the Alzheimer's disease. Once every 67 seconds in America, once every 67 seconds, an American is diagnosed with Alzheimer's. Last year, we spent $226 billion as a federal government in Medicare and Medicaid on Alzheimer's care. We estimate about the same number, over $200 billion, was spent by families trying to care for those afflicted by dementia and Alzheimer's. And there's a suggestion now that because our failure on budget negotiations will lead to the suspension of research, there's a suggestion that we will destroy any hope of finding a cure for this dreaded disease and scores of other diseases. That's how serious this conversation is. It's unfortunate that it's reached this point.